Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're tackling something pretty fundamental in early education.
Hmm.
It's about how teachers give feedback when young kids, K through 5, are reading aloud.
Right, that oral reading moment, crucial stuff.
Exactly. And we've got this really interesting review article to dig into.
Yeah.
It's called Teachers' Feedback on Oral Reading. A critical review of its effects and the use of theory in research came out pretty recently, October 2024, in Educational Psychology Review.
Okay, solid source.
Yeah, and it pulls together 24 different studies from 1995 right up to 2022.
Wow, that's a good chunk of research.
It is. So for you, our focus, our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. What really makes teacher feedback work during oral reading?
And crucially, what ideas, what theories are researchers actually using to try and figure this out?
Right. We're going to unpack the complexities, look for those maybe surprising insights, those aha moments.
Absolutely. This kind of review is so valuable because, well, it gives us that snapshot, doesn't it? Where are we with understanding this seemingly simple thing, giving feedback?
Simple, but clearly not straightforward.
Exactly. And it highlights not just what we think we know, but like you said, the gaps, the inconsistencies. It gets complicated fast.
Okay, let's jump right in then. The review, well, it states pretty clearly up front that while everyone agrees feedback is vital,
Foundational.
there aren't really clear best practices that the research points to. It sounds like effective feedback, it just varies a lot.
That's a key takeaway right there. The researchers found a lot of variation, both in the types of feedback studied and, importantly, in the actual impact that feedback had.
Which makes giving general advice pretty tricky.
Very tricky. And it really highlights why we need to dig into the nuances.
So these 24 studies, what kinds of feedback were they actually looking at? The review breaks it down, right, into categories.
Yes, exactly. 4 main types they identified. The one that got the most attention, by far, is what they term performance feedback.
Performance feedback. Okay, what's that involve?
That's the information teachers give about, well, performance. Things like reading speed, rate, how many words were read correctly versus incorrectly, whether the students self-corrected errors.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. The measurable stuff. Easy to observe, easy to count.
Pretty much. You can see it happening as the child reads. So that was heavily studied.
Makes sense. What else was common?
The second category was supporting elements.
Supporting elements.
Yeah, things teachers might add alongside that performance feedback, like setting specific reading goals with the student,
Right.
or maybe offering some kind of reward for their effort or achievement. These were also looked at quite a bit, often together with that performance feedback.
Got it. So not just you read X words correctly, but maybe let's try for Y next time, or, the classic sticker chart.
Exactly that kind of thing.
Okay, what were the other types? You said 4?
Right. The third type get less research attention. It's called explicit corrective feedback.
Explicit corrective.
This is when the teacher directly steps in. They might correct a word reading error, tell the student the right word, perhaps give a quick decoding hint.
So active intervention?
Yes.
Oh.
And it also includes more direct instruction on things like, say, understanding the meaning comprehension or using prosody.
Prosody. That's the rhythm, the expression in their voice.
Exactly. That rhythm and intonation. So it's actual teaching in the moment.
Right, not just observing and reporting back. And you're saying that wasn't studied as much as just counting errors or timing speed.
Correct. Less attention than performance feedback.
Interesting.
And the last one, the fourth type, and this one was the least researched, was implicit feedback.
Implicit feedback.
Yeah, this mainly involved teachers asking questions, either during the reading or maybe afterwards. The idea is to guide the students' thinking, their understanding, without just handing them the answer.
That's quite surprising, isn't it?
It really struck me too, the kind of feedback that feels almost intuitively, like it would be key for understanding just asking thoughtful questions, was the least studied.
Yeah. That feels like a pretty big gap in what we know.
I agree. You'd think prompting a child to think deeper about the text would be a major focus.
Definitely. Okay, so we have these different types, studied to different extents. What did the research actually find? What seems to work? Let's start with fluency. Reading smoothly and accurately.
Right. For fluency, the review found that combining goal setting with that performance feedback we mentioned earlier.
The speed and accuracy info.
Yeah, that combination showed some positive effects. It seems like having a clear target and getting feedback on progress towards it can really help.
That makes intuitive sense, gives them direction, something concrete. What about the rewards, stickers, prizes? Did they help fluency?
Well, the findings there are a bit more mixed. Rewards might give a short-term boost, especially, it seems, for kids who are really struggling.
Okay, little motivational push.
Perhaps. But the long-term impact on fluency, that's less clear from the studies. It's possible that extrinsic motivation just kind of fades.
So, maybe a quick fix, but not a lasting solution on its own.
Potentially. What else seemed promising for fluency?
The review mentioned feedback focusing on self-corrections.
Ah, yes. When the student catches their own mistake.
Right. And also something called delayed feedback, where the teacher waits until after the reading to address errors instead of interrupting right away.
Both of those showed some promise for fluency. It suggests maybe giving students a little space to problem solve themselves and then reflect.
Yeah, letting the process unfold a bit.
Exactly. Okay, now let's shift gears. Fluency is important, but the real goal is understanding, right? Comprehension.
Absolutely. Reading fast means nothing if you don't get it. What did the feedback research say about comprehension?
This is where it gets really interesting, I think. The review found that feedback focused on the meaning of the text.
Not just pronouncing the words correctly.
Exactly. Feedback about meaning seemed more effective for improving comprehension. Also, for first graders specifically, asking a mix of questions, some simpler recall, some more complex thinking questions that appeared to help their understanding.
So the type of feedback interaction really matters for comprehension.
It seems so. Just correcting phonics or word errors isn't the same as helping a child grasp the story, the ideas.
That's a really key distinction. It really reinforces that reading is so much more than just decoding.
Definitely.
What about motivation? The student's desire to read. How does feedback play into that?
Okay, motivation. The review suggested that feedback boosting a student's belief in their own reading ability, what psychologists call reading self-efficacy.
Their I can do this feeling about reading.
Precisely. Feedback that builds that up seemed to positively influence motivation. Encouragement, showing progress.
Makes sense, build confidence.
But on the other hand, negative feedback, like just focusing on error counts and also using those external rewards, they had mixed effects on long-term interest in reading.
So it's delicate.
Very delicate. You want to give useful information, but without discouraging them or making them dependent on getting a prize. It's a real balancing act.
It really sounds like it. Now, one point the review really stresses, you mentioned it earlier, is the variability. What works seems to differ a lot between students.
Absolutely. That came through loud and clear. Every child is different strengths, weaknesses, learning styles, temperaments.
Right.
So a feedback strategy that's great for one kid might just fall flat or even be counterproductive for another. This really highlights the complexity for teachers.
And it makes finding those universal best practices really challenging.
Extremely challenging.
And it seems the research itself might have some blind spots. The review noted fluency was studied way more often than comprehension or motivation.
Yes, that was a striking finding. Fluency was the most common reading outcome measured in these feedback studies. Comprehension and motivation got significantly less airtime.
Which is kind of ironic, isn't it? Given that understanding and wanting to read are arguably the bigger goals.
It is telling. It seems the research focus might have leaned towards those more easily quantifiable aspects of reading. Speed and accuracy are just easier to measure than depth of understanding or intrinsic motivation.
That's a critical point. Makes you wonder if the research priorities have always matched the ultimate instructional goals.
It certainly raises the question.
Okay, so that's a good look at the effects of feedback, or at least what the research shows so far. Let's pivot now to the second part of our mission, the theories. What are the big ideas, the frameworks that researchers have been using to think about all this?
Right, the theories behind the practice. The review gives a nice historical overview. In the early days, let's say mid-60s to mid-70s, behaviorism was really dominant.
Skinner, Pavlov, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Focus on observable behavior, learning through reinforcement, repetition, association. So feedback then often involved repeated readings, immediate correction, maybe rewards for getting it right.
Very much about shaping the behavior directly.
Yes. Then things shifted. From the mid-70s to mid-80s, cognitive approaches became more influential.
Moving inside the head.
Pretty much. The focus shifted to internal mental processes. How does the mind work during reading? Researchers started breaking reading down into subskills, phonics, decoding, vocabulary,
Okay.
and feedback became more targeted towards those specific cognitive skills. trying to fix the underlying mental machinery, if you like. Less about general reinforcement, more about pinpointing and addressing specific skill deficits.
So from behavior to the internal black box.
You could put it that way. Then, from the mid-'80s to mid-'90s, sociocultural perspectives gained ground.
Okay, what's the focus there?
The social context of learning, how learning happens through interaction. The teacher's role shifted, becoming less of a pure instructor and more of a facilitator.
Guiding the learning.
Right. Feedback was seen as part of that whole learning environment, part of the dialogue, aiming to build understanding, interest, strategies through, social interaction.
So less top-down correction, more collaborative.
Exactly. A teacher using this lens might ask why a student reads something a certain way connected to their prior knowledge. The interaction itself is key.
Interesting shift. What came next?
The next wave, maybe mid-'90s to mid-2000s, brought in engaged learning. Here, motivation really took center stage.
Connecting back to what we discussed earlier.
Yes. Feedback started to be viewed through the lens of building student confidence, making reading interesting, enjoyable, connecting feedback to the student's feelings, their drive.
Recognizing that emotional and motivational side is crucial.
Absolutely. And the most recent period they highlight, mid-2000s to mid-2010s, they call the era of personalized learning.
Technology-driven.
Largely, yes. Big focus on using data, assessments, tech tools to tailor feedback to individual student levels and needs.
That's good in principle.
It does. But the review authors add a note of caution. They suggest this tech-driven approach might have, maybe unintentionally, overemphasized the easily measurable aspects, again, accuracy, speed.
At the expense of comprehension or enjoyment.
Potentially. A risk of letting the metrics drive the feedback. Maybe losing sight of the bigger picture of what it means to be a reader.
So it sounds like all these different ways of thinking, behaviorist, cognitive, sociocultural, motivational, personalized, they've all left their mark.
That's a key point from the review. These diverse perspectives on reading still coexist. It really underlines how complex reading is. It's cognitive, it's social, it's motivational.
Okay. Now, what about theories specifically feedback itself? Not just reading, but feedback as a process. How have those ideas evolved?
Well, much like the reading theories, early feedback ideas were heavily behaviorist. Correct errors, reinforce right answers. Very teacher-directed.
Top-down information flow.
Exactly. Later, cognitive views started looking at the mental processes. How does the student process the feedback? What happens in that black box when feedback is received? Trying to understand why some feedback works better than others internally.
Okay, getting more nuanced.
Right. And then more recently, sociocultural views of feedback have become prominent. These really emphasize the student's active role.
How so?
They focus on the context, how students interpret feedback, how they actually use it. Concepts like feedback literacy come in here.
Feedback literacy, meaning?
A student's ability to understand feedback, to make sense of it, and then act on it effectively. And also agency, the student feeling like they have some control over their learning process.
So it's not just about the teacher delivering feedback, but the student receiving, understanding, and using it. Much more student-centered.
Absolutely. But here's a critical observation from the review.
Yes.
It seems the research specifically on reading feedback hasn't fully embraced these newer, more student-focused feedback theories.
Really? How so?
Teacher-centered models, those earlier ideas, still seem more dominant in the theoretical frameworks used in the reading feedback studies they reviewed.
That feels like a disconnect, doesn't it? We have these evolving ideas about feedback in general, but reading feedback research is lagging behind.
That's exactly what the review suggests. It's
Yep.
a really interesting point. It makes you wonder why that lag exists.
It does. So let's dig into that. How was theory actually used in those 24 studies? Were they upfront about their theoretical basis?
Well, it was kind of mixed.
Yeah.
The review found many studies actually referenced findings from previous research more often than they cited established theories of feedback.
So building on past results rather than a core theory.
Almost like the empirical data itself was doing the work of theory, providing the main framework.
That's fascinating. Suggests a very empirically driven field, maybe less theoretically grounded sometimes.
Could be. Now, reading theories were cited more explicitly, especially those cognitive ones about word reading mechanics.
Okay.
But theories about motivation, or the student's perspective on feedback, those weren't strongly emphasized in the frameworks.
Which ties back to what we saw earlier, the research focus tending towards fluency over motivation or comprehension. The theoretical lens might be shaping the research questions.
It seems very likely. The lens you use definitely shapes what you look at.
So how did theory guide the actual research process, like designing the studies, analyzing data?
The review looked at that too. For study design, what they called conceptualization, it really varied. Some were implicit, just drawing on general ideas. Others were explicit, sometimes combining theories.
Okay.
But what was really notable, none of the studies seemed to position themselves between competing theories. They weren't set up to directly test theory A versus theory B.
No theoretical showdowns. You'd think comparing approaches might be revealing.
You would. Then, for data analysis, about half the studies had a clear link between their initial theory and how they analyzed the data.
And the other half.
Less clear. Or sometimes they introduced new theoretical ideas during the analysis phase itself, ideas that weren't there at the start.
That sounds a bit messy, like shifting the framework midstream.
It raises questions about consistency, definitely. And then in the discussion section, most studies did use their initial theory to help explain their findings.
Okay, so they circled back.
They did. A few questioned their own results, maybe if they're unexpected, but they didn't really question the theory itself. And very few introduced significant new theoretical ideas in the discussion.
So the theory was mostly used to set the stage and interpret, but not really to be tested or pushed forward by the study itself.
That seems to be the pattern. It acted more as a lens than something to be actively refined or challenged.
And maybe the most surprising finding related to theory.
Ah, yes. The review found that whether a study actually reported significant effects from the feedback intervention, it didn't strongly depend on how much or how explicitly they used theory in their design or write-up.
Wow. So using a strong theoretical framework didn't necessarily correlate with finding positive results.
Apparently not, based on this set of studies, which really suggests that maybe the current theories we're using, they might not be fully capturing the important factors at play in reading feedback.
That's a huge point. It suggests a potential gap in our fundamental understanding.
It really does. A potential disconnect between the theories we have and the complex reality of how feedback actually influences young readers.
Okay, the learner, let's try and synthesize this. What are the key takeaways from this deep dive into teacher feedback for oral reading?
Well, the big picture, I think, is that while we absolutely know teacher feedback is vital,
Crucial.
the research hasn't yet given us a simple, universal playbook for making it work perfectly every time. It's still being mapped out.
Right. We saw some promising paths like goal setting plus performance feedback for fluency.
And focusing on meaning for comprehension.
But a huge caveat is that individual student differences are massive. What works really varies.
Exactly. That personalization aspect, understanding the individual kid, seems paramount. General strategies only go so far.
And the surprising element, perhaps, is how the research field itself seems to operate, often building on past findings, more than explicitly testing or refining feedback theories.
Yeah, that reliance on empirical precedent over, say, robust feedback theory was striking. And there seems to be a real need for bringing in broader theoretical perspectives.
Especially ones that focus more on the student's experience, their motivation, how they interpret and use feedback.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Giving more weight to feedback literacy and student agency within the theoretical frameworks guiding the research, there's a potential gap there.
Okay. So given all this, the coexist theories, the lack of definitive answers, the importance of individual context, here's a final thought for you, the learner, to chew on. What might we learn by consciously trying out feedback strategies rooted in different theoretical camps in our own context, whether that's teaching or even your own learning?
Interesting. Like intentionally comparing a behaviorist approach versus a sociocultural one.
Maybe. Or just thinking more deeply about the why. How might focusing more on the theory behind the feedback, the underlying assumptions about how learning happens, rather than just what the specific technique lead to new insights or better outcomes for young readers?
That's a great question to ponder. Moving beyond just finding what works empirically to better understanding why it works or doesn't, based on deeper principles.
It's definitely a complex puzzle, but hopefully this deep dive has given you some valuable pieces to think about. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the discussion.